Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Freaksense TV podcast. Today's episode is part number 3 of our incredibly entertaining and important series, Everything You Know is a Lie. Now, would you like to hear some truth? And today's very, very special guest is a personal friend and someone that I really do admire. In many, many ways, is none other than Mark Devlin, author of Musical Truth, Volume 1 and 2. Greetings, my friend, all the way from good old England.
Charlie, good to be with you. Thank you for the kind comments. You're always very supportive of me. People are going to think you're my agent or something, or on the payroll with all these great comments. But I certainly appreciate the support you've shown towards my work and what I'm trying to get across.
Well, thank you so much for your comments. And you know, Colleen and I are very, very much looking to embrace people within the truth community.
And so is the dog.
One of 21. As part of our, what we call our extended family, or Colleen likes to say our tribe. And as we were discussing pre-show, sadly, the reality is that it's not an easy thing to do. And really, it just comes down to the information. And this is such an important part of our reality, and it will become a very important part of our show today, which essentially is we've got to get ourselves out of this program rut of being passive learners, passive human beings, into active learners, active human beings. And when we're active with our awareness, we do not simply hand over idolatry or fanatical blind support to any one individual. What we do is we stay conscious and focused in the moment, and we take everything as it is the moment. And in the moment, the only thing that is constant is change. So as we go through all of this material and all of the people that we're learning from and building off of their material, what we're doing is we're listening intently to what they're saying in the moment. And this is the biggest compliment that Colleen and I can pay to you, Mark, and that is this. From the moment we became aware of your work and then listening to reading both of your books, which are must-owns, they absolutely are. This is not some crass attempt to try and promote Mark's work because he's on the show. These are must-own books. These are the core of how the system works. It applies to everything, not just the music industry. But the biggest compliment that we can pay you, Mark, is this, that everything we've heard from you is consistent. Everything we've heard from you flows easily and effortlessly as part of the truth narrative. And there are no red flags that come up. And for example, on your website or Facebook page, which we follow, and for lots of very interesting information and great discussion, you're never saying to people, if you're one of these, spiritual suck-ups or some kind of harbinger of the light, fuck off, go away, unsubscribe to me, get off my Facebook page, hit the road. If you believe in flat earth, then you're the problem, you're this, you're that.
Yep, seen a few of those.
Red flags. Exactly. But that's not Mark Devlin. Mark Devlin in every single show, no matter who it is, no matter where it is, shows up, is present, and gives, and this is what we see, and I know it's absolutely true. You give your heart and soul in every single moment, Mark, no matter how big or how small the audience, no matter if it's on your home turf or in the United States, wherever it is, you are present in the moment, and your information is consistent, it's brilliant, and it is always with ease and flow sharing the truth of our reality. And I can't give higher praise. So I'm going to hand it over to you. I know you've got some comments to make about this very special day, which is June 6, 2018, if that's what it really is. And then I'd like you to touch, if you can, also on Musical Truth Volume 2.
Okay, well, I'm just doing what I came here to do, basically. I'm on the path that I was always meant to be on. It took me a while to get on it and to realise that, but sometimes it's so long since I was in the Matrix. It's only about 8 years when I properly consciously woke up to the real nature of this reality. And it's difficult for me to get back into that mindset and remember what life was actually like for me and how I perceived things prior to this, because I've come so far on this journey. I've got so much further to go, I recognise that, but it's very difficult for me sometimes to relate to regular members of society that have not undergone any kind of conscious awakening, and I can lose patience with them, and I can just despair of their base, profane levels of consciousness, and I have to remind myself that I was at that point myself up until round about 2010. So it's just something that I have to keep kicking myself up the arse with and getting myself back on track with sometimes. I did want to mention the date that we're recording this, which is the 6th of June, as you've said. So that's 6/6. That is surely going to fuel further rumours that I'm some kind of devil worshipper or Satanist, which I seem to get every week. People say, see, he's telling you, mark of the devil, it's there in his name. And all these other retarded, moronic comments that you have to put up with when you're a researcher in this field, sadly. But the significance of today's date, whatever people want to place on it, is that it was my granddad's birthday in 1900, so if he'd lived, he would be 118 years old today. He's not some kind of reptilian bloody entity that is still alive. He did pass away in 1986. But the 6th of June was also D-Day during the Second World War, 1944, and it also happens to be my wedding anniversary, so that's today. And it's very interesting to me the way these dates fall when I'm scheduled to do interviews such as this, because it's never planned. It's always just the way it works out. So last year, I got invited to go on a UK radio show called Raconteurs News. And the only day that I had free in my schedule at that time was September 11th, 9/11. So we ended up talking about the symbolic significance of that date and how it crops up in the music industry in terms of predictive programming and such. Then I was scheduled to do an interview with Mike Williams, who I know you had on as a guest recently, Sage of Quay, great guy, good friend of mine. The only date that I could find a gap for in my diary was the 22nd of March, which is 322. Which is right at the beginning of this occult season of sacrifice that we discussed. And also, of course, 322 is strongly associated with Skull and Bones, the secret society coming out of Yale University. Then I was due to do a show with Kev Baker on Truth Frequency Radio here in the UK. The only date I could find a gap for in my diary was the 1st of May, May Day, Walpurgisnacht. Beltane, you know, the end of that period of occult sacrifice. And here we are today, and we threw a few dates around. We were scheduled to do this the other week, and I had to cancel, unfortunately. But the only time I could find a gap in my diary was the 6th of June. And of course, people, as I say, will place all kinds of significance on 6/6. So it certainly seems as if the universe or creation is taking a hand in this and making some kind of statement in terms of the way these dates play out. In terms of Musical Truth, as you mentioned, yes, the book has been out a few months now, Volume 2, and it is getting a lot of good response, I'm very happy to say. I get the odd hater. I suppose it comes with the territory with this kind of work, and you get the odd idiot spouting venom and bile on YouTube comments and Facebook threads and things like that. But for the most part, I would say about 95% of the feedback that I have has been positive and supportive and validating. So it's people saying to me, thank you for the information. It absolutely chimes with what I've come to understand about the true nature of the industry. I'm getting a lot of insiders, people that have been musicians, that have been record industry executives, that have been producers, and they've said, yeah, what you have put in the book is absolutely correct, because I've seen this stuff happen myself. I've been in meetings with record corporations and some of this stuff has come up, and I've seen some very unsavory things that absolutely bear out what you're saying. So this is all very positive validation for me. When I first started doing this work, I reached a point where I kind of had to put my neck on the line, and having accumulated all this knowledge of what goes on in the industry, I had to take the decision to stick my head up above the parapet and go public with it, put my name to it, and just bite that bullet. And I realised there was no turning back once I did that. I would be burning bridges. And in the early days, I had a few doubts about it. I wondered where it was going to lead me. I wondered if it was the correct thing to do. Even though I felt in my heart that it was the right thing to do. And I really wanted to be sure that I'd got it 100% right with the information, because some of what I was saying it sounded so fantastic and so outrageous on the surface. When you get into trauma-based mind control and occult symbolism and the concepts of demonic possession and the idea of backmasking and these satanic messages that can be contained within audio recordings. And so I found myself thinking, have I got this right? I really hope that I'm not making a fool of myself here and putting out misinformation. And I've got to say that every single time that somebody has got in touch and reached out to respond to this information, it's been to validate and confirm that it's absolutely correct. Another thing that I have to put up with is criticism that what I'm actually doing is bringing together bits of work from other people and sort of aggregating them all and putting them all together and taking bits and pieces from what other people have put out. And the response to that is, yes, that is what I'm doing. And why would that be such a problem? You've got lots of videos on YouTube where people are looking at different aspects of the conspiracy. So you get videos about mind control, you get videos about symbolism that's going into the US Super Bowl and the Grammys and things like that, and all these other bits of information. And they're very disparate and they're scattered around all over the place. What I've done is to bring all of this together in one place. I've added lots of observations and comments and musings of my own. Because I've got some stuff to say about these things. I've brought in the concept of free will consciousness, natural law, consequentialism, and these dynamics that are built into this very reality in which we find ourselves. So there's spiritual components to what I talk about. And I've tried to put it out there in a very accessible, easily understandable way, in language that anyone can find accessible. And I get complimented on that from people that have said, this seemed a very confusing subject to me before, but you've been able to bring it all together in a way that absolutely makes sense. So I do see that as having been my job. And I think there was a vacancy for this kind of book to be put out there for wide consumption by the masses. And you don't need to come with any kind of prior knowledge of these subjects to get something from the books, I would say. You could put them in the hands of a complete novice that has never looked at this stuff before, and I like to think there's something in there that's going to resonate and chime with them. So that's what I've set out to do with these books, and I'm quite happy now with how it's all panned out. In those early days, I had lots of doubts, lots of reservations, but all I'm getting now is confirmation that I'm doing what I came here to do. And that's what all of us need to be reaching towards, because each and every person listening to this has a contribution to make. People's contributions will differ from person to person according to their skill set and what they're good at and how they can express themselves, but everyone can make some kind of contribution to the process that needs to take place. And I know we'll get more into that as we progress through this, Charlie.
Yeah, we will, and I'm so very thankful that without saying anything, that you naturally flowed into the spiritual aspect of what you're saying and doing. And in many instances, it's an implied thing, but there is such a thing very, very powerfully as synchronicity. And when your heart is in the right place, and by that I mean that, like Gandhi, the purpose of life ultimately is satyagraha, which is I am here to search for, seek, and embrace the truth. That is my life purpose. So when we are sincere to the ultimate truth, the ultimate reality, the ultimate freedom, which is truth in every moment, then all these synchronicities happen, because even though in your case you may be specifically talking or applying it to the music industry, it resonates. like you said, you don't have to be a major fan of any particular type of music, rap, hip hop, rock and roll, or even just someone who's overly obsessed with the music industry. You just need to be an awakened human being. If you're reading this consciously in the moment, the amount of information that is palpable, that is ready to absorb, is incredible. And again, it does work on this synchronicity or synchronistic level that you as a honest seeker of truth are sharing these truths. And again, regardless of the fact that it may be applied specifically to the music industry, it resonates to anyone else who is authentically searching for the truth. And that bears out what you said about anyone can purchase this book, sit down and read it, and become engrossed. And you will. There's the way that you write is obviously based very strongly in factual information. It's compelling. It brings you in, and then you have a great skill set as a writer to infuse the truth and your interpretation of the truth against all of this factual backdrop. And it just makes for very intense, very passionate, very entertaining reading. And it is, when I read your work, it's very difficult to just pick it up and put it down. You want to just keep reading and reading.
Right.
And I, like I say, I'm so glad that you said these things, because to me and to Colleen and I, what we always felt when we came across your work is that a natural segue for you was, once you were finished going through applying this to the music industry, that because everything that you say ultimately are universal truths, that this would apply out universally to everything. So if you could just give me some thoughts on what you're thinking in terms of where you go next with that brilliant mind of yours.
Well, what comes to mind is something that was raised in the discussion you had with Mike Williams the other week, where he mentioned there are a lot of researchers and presenters and commentators and authors and speakers in the truth and alternative media scene that can talk forever about the nature of the conspiracy and all the challenges that humanity is facing at the hands of the elite ruling class that want to enslave and genocide us all. But they don't seem to take the conversation any further to look at the spiritual components of what's really going on in this reality and what any of us are doing here in the first place. And it's essential, if we're going to gain any kind of understanding of how we turn this situation around, that we expand our consciousness to take on board some of these spiritual considerations, because we are spirit souls having a human experience, not humans having some kind of spiritual experience. This life, in so many ways, is the dream. And when we go to sleep at night and have our dreams, that, it turns out, seems to be closer to our true spiritual nature than in our waking hours when we're running around taking care of all our activities during the day. Everything is back to front, everything is reversed, everything is inverted. And I know that's the overall theme of these podcasts. Certainly we'll get into some examples of that and my thoughts on that. In terms of where I want to take things next, I'm grateful for the opportunity today to have a more far-reaching conversation than I normally do, because most interviews I do, people ask me about the Beatles and Tavistock Institute and symbolism in Beyonce and Jay-Z videos and stuff like that, and I can certainly talk about that, but I do appreciate the opportunity to get into some of these other areas and really dig deep in my thoughts and my reflections. So my next project is going to be a novel. I've decided that I want to convey some spiritual truths. I want to get across these ideas of how natural law is in effect, cause and effect, consequentialism, karmic law, universal law, call it what you will. The way in which our chosen thoughts, emotions, behaviours, according to our free will consciousness with which we're blessed, it's our greatest blessing from the Creator, actually have a bearing on the physical experiences that we undergo as a result. And that happens both on a personal basis and on a collective basis in a society, in the whole of human society. So when the overall consciousness levels of a human population are very, very low, very base, they've been allowed to get very profane and very degraded and very debased, then the experience that that society undergoes generally is going to be entirely in accordance with that low level of consciousness. The unfortunate thing about it is that you'll have a few individuals in society, a very small percentage of the collective, that have taken personal responsibility for their thoughts, emotions and actions. They have taken on an understanding of how this dynamic of natural law works, but unfortunately, because we live all together on a collective basis, and because each of us as spirit souls came into this realm of existence together as individual expressions of the one, to have these individual experiences, but nevertheless all coming from the same source, we're all connected, and so we all share in the outcomes that are brought about by, you know, these collective thoughts, emotions and actions. I wanted to convey this information in a very impactful and influential way. So it's likely to be called The Cure and the Cause. And the idea behind it is that on the surface, ostensibly, it's going to appear as a murder thriller. And that's because I want to be able to draw in a kind of mainstream, regular sort of readership that aren't expecting to have great spiritual truths conveyed to them, but they're going to find it in there nevertheless. So it's going to be loaded with allegory. It's going to be heavy on the metaphors. There's going to be a lot of wordplay in names and things like that. And it's going to be set in Oxford, which is my birth city. It's a place I know very well, so I didn't want to do it in London or something like that. There's enough stories set in London. Of course, the Inspector Morse stories were set in Oxford, but that was very much the college establishment side of the city. This is going to be the more sleazy, cutting-edge side of Oxford, because there is one. It's going to be based around a radio station similar to the one that I used to work on, Fox FM. And of course I'm aware that Fox in gematria breaks down as 666, so there we go again. That's going to fuel these devil worship rumours just a little bit more. You're going to have a journalist from this radio station along with her boyfriend that are trying to get to the bottom of what's causing all these killings around the city. There's going to be a couple of hopeless, hapless police officers assigned to the case, and there's going to be this consciousness guru that gives lectures on natural law and stuff like that, who's going to get involved in looking at the symbolic aspects of these murders as well. So I hope to be able to convey a lot through apparent fiction. Of course, there's things you can say under the guise of fiction that you might not be able to get away with too much in non-fiction. And it's something I'm very excited about. So that's going to be the next project that I get into. Just in terms of the title of your podcast series, Everything You Know Is a Lie, and Would You Like to Hear Some Truth? When I heard the title of that, and I realised that was the theme you were going for, there were a number of things that came to mind, and there's a few things that I think bear repeating here, if you don't mind. So the first thing I just wanted to bring up is a quote that is often used by David Icke. I make no apologies for using it again because it really drives home the point. And so what if other people have used this quote before, if it helps to get the story across? It's a quote that comes from an author called Michael Ellner. Didn't know much about him before this. I looked him up, and unfortunately he passed away in February of this year. But this great quote that he put out a few years ago said, "Just look at us. Everything is backwards. Everything is upside down. Doctors destroy health, lawyers destroy justice, psychiatrists destroy minds, scientists destroy truth, major media destroys information, religions destroy spirituality, and governments destroy freedom." It put me in mind of a Facebook post that I made quite a number of years ago, which turned out to be rather popular, and I called it the official version of everything. And it just refers to the fact that the control system that we have wants us to think a certain way about everything. So everything that ever happens in history or in the so-called real world has a Wikipedia public relations style explanation for it and a way of thinking about it. And individuals that don't exercise any kind of higher-minded critical thought for themselves and allow themselves to be mind-controlled, and socially engineered and swept along with, groupthink, the hive mind mentality, all seem to adhere to this way of looking at things. So let me just drop a few examples on you here. This is the way that people are entrained and programmed to think about certain things, the official version of them. So CCTV cameras everywhere. They're to prevent terrorism. And if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, Then fluoride in the drinking water. It's good for teeth. That's why it's there. Dentists say it helps prevent cavities. So that's a very good reason for having sodium fluoride in our water. The royals. Why do we have a royal family that have all these riches and are granted special privilege over and above everyone else? Well, they're good for tourism, aren't they? Why would anyone come to London if it wasn't to see the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace? So that's why they're there. Voting, well, you have a genuine choice. We don't live in one of those horrible fascist dictatorships where we're told what to do and our leaders are given to us. No. You get to choose. Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? Which one do you choose? That's democracy, genuine choice. The government, well, the government are there because they care about us, don't they? They just want what's best for us. They're looking out for us. They know what's best and they tell us, and we should just listen to them because they care. All prime ministers in Britain just happening to have attended the same public schools, universities and secret society fraternities. So they all come out of Eton or Sandhurst or Oxford or Cambridge, and it's pure random chance. They could have come from anywhere. They just happened to come out of those places. Like all these US presidents that come out of Harvard and Yale and Skull and Bones and places like that. Just coincidence, random chance. Obama, Cameron, Bush, the Queen of England, all just happening to have the same genealogical bloodline links. Pure random chance, absolute coincidence. Nothing more than that. Nothing to see here. Cannabis, well, it's evil, isn't it? It's really bad. It's a gateway to harder drugs. That's why it's outlawed, because we can't have people running around smoking cannabis. It just turns them into dangerous killers and, just psychopaths. 20 Benson and Hedges. No problem to go out and buy a packet of fags. No problem with it. Way safer than cannabis. GM foods from those nice people at Monsanto. Well, they're completely safe, aren't they? Independent organic farm produce. Unsafe. Untested. If the FDA hasn't looked at it, then we shouldn't be putting it into our bodies, because they tell us what's good. Alternative healing and homeopathy. Well, it's dangerous and unscientific. It's pseudoscience, it's bunkum. It's unproven. Toxic pharmaceutical drugs. Well, they're just fine. They'll make you better. Listen to your doctor. He knows what's best for you. Vaccines. Safe. Needed, aren't they? Absolutely needed. You've got to decimate the immune system of a baby to protect them from all these diseases. BBC News and Fox News and CNN, well, the truth. They're there to tell us what's going on in the world, aren't they? Wi-Fi, microwave and radio waves everywhere. No threat to human health whatsoever. It's all completely safe. You can trust us and just do what the government tells you. Jimmy Savile abusing kids for 50 years on taxpayer-funded BBC premises. A terrible one-off isolated case. Nobody knew it was going on, but don't worry, we've learnt from it, and the BBC continues on, and there's no paedophiles there now, honest. You can probably sense a certain amount of cynicism on my part there, Charlie. I do find that I get a little world-weary with some of this stuff, and I do find that a dry, sardonic, sarcastic sense of humour is the only way of dealing with it. But I hope those examples there illustrate the madness and the sheer insanity of this upside-down world that we live in, where everything is inverted. You're told that a plant medicine, cannabis, is bad for you and you can't have it, and if you're caught with it, you can get caged, go to jail for a number of years. Whereas pharmaceutical drugs, which come with all manner of side effects, you read the list of side effects, and it's basically everything that could ever happen to you, passing out, bleeding from your mouth, dying even, all these side effects that come with pharmaceutical drugs, and yet we're told they're just fine. Just do what your doctor tells you, and that is the madness of the world in which we live. Everything is inverted, nothing makes sense, and when you realise that it's not supposed to make sense, stop looking for sanity in this reality in which we find ourselves, because it's been engineered and structured to be mad, to be confounding, to be confusing. You cross such a boundary when you realize that that is how it's supposed to be, and then you set about finding the sane way of looking at things.
Exactly. No, you just perfect, absolutely perfect. It saves me from just having to go over it again.
Right. So I'm on a rant there, but you get the picture.
No. But it's so important because you should be on a rant, and there should be a certain amount of cynicism, because that is the natural byproduct of beautiful, natural, created, God created, natural human beings. We are miracles of creation. We truly are, and we're blessed in every single way. When everything is a duality and we possess free will, that the 50% of our playing field which exists within the physical realm is nothing more than a big science experiment. And as kids, when we were gifted little things that allowed us to do and to partake in little science experiments, we were happy as pigs in mud, because it's our true reality. That's essentially, I think, why we are here. In other words, what's the purpose of being here? Why am I here? Who am I? Right. Well, you're an individual. And as like you said, we are all part of the collected whole. That's why synchronicity is such a powerful reality, and it's instantaneous, faster than that speed of light. Oh, sorry about that, Einstein, but it just happens to be true.
Right.
We are synchronistically connected to one another in the moment, which is all that exists. Linear time's just a hoax. And that's why we intuitively and instinctively get these gut feelings about other people, or that something might be going on somewhere else within it, whether it's within your own family or home or just elsewhere in the world. We get these feelings all the time. We dismiss them and forget about them because we're dismissive of the other half of the football field. This was one of the brilliant things that Mike Williams shared with us on part 1 of this series, Everything You Know Is a Lie. And Mike came up with that incredible analogy, which you're doing the same thing, that in ultimate reality, there are two worlds. And that is one of the biggest suppositions, biggest components of what I am saying in my central thesis, is that we, magical creations, human beings, live simultaneously within two worlds. It is exactly how Professor Tolkien wrote the elves. For those of you who are familiar with Middle-earth and The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, the elves were beings that live simultaneously in two worlds. They were consciously aware that they had a physical aspect to them, but they also knew that their essence, which is what you described in the introduction to this podcast today, is that our true reality is not here within the Maya that appears to be solid and real, our playground, our science experiment. Our actual home is in heaven as pure consciousness.
Right.
And this is where we have this disconnect from the system. This is why what you're talking about, all of the cognitive dissonance that exists and the great success that people like Edward Bernays have in all of the different agendas that his corporate masters set upon his plate, and why he's so successful. Because if you only believe in 50 yards of the football field, you're only ever going to see, experience, and understand, if you can, half of this great game.
Right.
And when people within the truth community are absolutely dismissive, and not just with the occasional comment or remark here and there, but in absolute tyrannical rants, angry faces, angry voices, basically mocking those who go into this supposed spiritual mumbo jumbo, they doesn't matter whether they are paid shills of the system. It doesn't matter who's ultimately complicit because they're part of the system or not. They are still doing the work of what I call the matrix or organized society. And everything happens because we are passive learners. And we are passive learners because we only believe in 50 yards or half of the football field. If we're not more like the elves, where we understand that the entire purpose is to reach eye level, and I'm not talking about EYE level. That's so important, and that's why flat Earth, which we'll get into later, is so important. It explains everything.
That's right.
I'm not talking about EYE level. I'm talking about the letter I level. And then this ties into everything that you were talking about earlier. It ties into Marty Leeds. It ties into sacred geometry and Antonio Gaudi. It ties into sacred geometry and the chakras. And the basic purpose of our life, as I was saying to you, in our physical realm, is a science experiment. It's just everything that comes across our path, we experiment and we apply our free will to it. Some like, some don't, some like a little more, some like a little less. There's no good, there's no bad, there's just you. And it's just your experientation with Mother Earth in the physical realm that defines half of the football field, which is our physical representation. Right. But if we are not accepting that there is or could be a creator, and that the creator lives in whatever you want to call it. I'll use heaven simply because it's a term that most people instinctively have a general understanding of what I'm saying. But if you're dismissive of that aspect of our reality, which, you know, again, is that gut feeling, is that inner voice, that inner monologue that we have that's with us in the moment always. And so how else do you want to explain it? If you're dismissive of that, once again, then you are easily deceived. And that's what we become, Mark, and I'll just pass it back over to you, passive learners.
Well, we're expressions of that divinity, that creative force that people would call God. That's the irony, if you like, of so many people wandering around thinking they are their name or their job title or their status in life, and thinking they know exactly what they are and exactly what they're doing here, and dismissing any kind of suggestion that there is a spiritual aspect to them or a higher self to them. The arrogance and the deep-rooted calcified ego of so many people is just incredible when they hear information such as what we're talking about here and they just scoff at it. They just completely throw it out, laugh at you, dismiss you as crazy, dismiss you as a nutter. They know who they are, they know what life is all about, and there's nothing you can tell them. You know, they've been conditioned and entrained into that deep-rooted concrete ego side of themselves. And it's probably worth bringing up a quote from Bill Hicks here at this point. I posted this on Facebook this week. It seems appropriate. This is one. I
saw it, loved it.
Right, one of his famous monologues. He said, as part of a routine, "Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration, that we're all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There's no such thing as death, life is only a dream, and we are the imagination of ourselves." And then, of course, he adds, "Here's Tom with the weather" for the comic effect. But he's absolutely nailed it there. And, you know, Bill Hicks was a guy that experimented with DMT, evidently, and psychedelics, and he was able to access his higher self. And what we hear about DMT trips and ayahuasca trips and things like that, never done one myself, but one day I'm going to get around to it and I'm going to have that experience. I'm sure many people listening to this have had that experience. What we hear is that it mimics what happens when our souls leave our bodies and we depart this reality and we go back to where we came from, because that's ultimately what this journey is. And we review the life that we've just lived and the decisions that we took and the behaviours that we undertook in this life. And, you can actually fast track to that process by going on one of these DMT trips. And you see yourself from the point of view of how your actions have impacted on others. You see yourself the way others have seen you, and you see the big picture and your very, very small role in the overall big picture of this reality and what we're all doing here and what this life is. So life is basically a school, and we come here to learn lessons. Our souls consent to this. So free will is everywhere in creation. It's our greatest gift as humans. We have the opportunity to decide for ourselves what thoughts, emotions and behaviours we're going to exhibit and put into the world. Everything is always a choice. We consent to it. But I think it goes further than that. And I think that our souls consent to coming into these bodies and having these life experiences that we have. Sometimes life can seem very hard, it can seem random, it can seem meaningless, it can seem a struggle. I certainly find everyday life a big struggle. I just find it difficult getting through the day, just with all the bullshit that you have to deal with and all the stuff you have to trudge through. I find it a hardship. And I think it's because at the root of everything, subconsciously I recognise that this is not our natural state. We're not supposed to live in this human form, this apparently physical form forever. There was a lyric from a Whitney Houston song, Your Love Is My Love. It's a great song. One of the lyrics in the song was, if I should die this very day, don't cry, because on earth we wasn't meant to stay. Absolutely, this is not our natural form. Another great lyric comes from Joni Mitchell, the song Woodstock, which was covered by Matthew's Southern Comfort, where she says, I don't know who I am, but life's for learning. That's why we come here. And I just want to drop some lyrics from a great skit from a hip-hop album by Apollo Brown, which I mentioned in the book. And I love this. I play it in conscious music DJ sets as well. It's called Soapbox. And you got this guy. And he says, it's hard. Easy is not an option. It's hard. Living, life is hard. You will go through things, and while you're going through them, you can't understand why it's happening to you. But after you go through it, you get back and you look at it and you say, oh, now I understand why I needed that lesson. And you look at it, you embrace whatever comes to you. Don't run from it, step towards it. Don't try to duck it like most people do. See, because most people want it easy. See, because easy come, easy what? Easy go. So he's absolutely encapsulated there why it is that we come into these bodies and consent to have these experiences. It is to undergo these individual lives, because everyone's life experiences are going to be different to the next person's, and we aggregate all of that knowledge and that wisdom and that consciousness and these lessons that we learn and these experiences that we undergo, and then we take it all back to source, because we are all expressions of that one divine source. I don't think it's the case that we're forced into these lives, as I've said. I think we consent to it, and I don't think there's a figure that people would call God that is forcing us to undergo these things. I think it's all voluntary. That's what I've come to understand from listening to a great many spiritual scholars and gurus and past life regressionists and people like that. So that is what we're doing here. And when I first heard the title of the David Icke book, Remember Who You Are, that really resonated with me. That was just some powerful shit. He's saying, remember who you are. So when you hear that we're these eternal spirit souls and we come here to have these experiences in this school that we call life, it's not that you're hearing that information for the first time. It's that you're remembering it because you've already known it. You've always known it. You've just been given a little reminder, a little prod. Remember who you are. It's powerful. Some people respond very well to this kind of information. They do wake up. They do start to remember. This puts me in mind of another Bill Hicks routine. And then other people, as I said, will scoff at it, will laugh at you, will egotistically and arrogantly just throw it all out. And it's because people are at different levels on their soul journey. I certainly accept that we go through many incarnations in this apparently physical reality. And over the course of several lifetimes, we accumulate our knowledge and our understandings. And I can only think that people that scoff at truth and laugh in the face of it and just completely reject it are not as advanced on their spiritual journey as those who find it resonates with them and those who embrace it and apply it to their lives. That's the only thing that can explain these different attitudes to things. And you just look at the way so many people, the majority of people in human society, swallow all that stuff that I mentioned at the start, the official version of everything. They believe everything that the BBC tells them. If it was on Fox News, it must be true. If a doctor tells them they've got to take these pills, well, the doctor knows best. The doctor said this plant compound, this natural cure, is dangerous and unscientific and unproven, so I'm not going to take that because the doctor knows best. You know, perish the thought that I should think for myself and do some research of my own. So most people just accept the mainstream version of everything, and it's because of the stage that they're at in their journey. They're not ready to progress to higher consciousness and higher thought. So what it seems to be, Charlie, to my mind, from having spent a lot of time musing on this, is some kind of interplay between the free will that we all have, so we get the opportunity to make decisions for ourselves, and some manner of things having been predetermined before we got here. So I think in that we consent as spirit souls to come into these bodies, to come into this world and have these experiences, there are certain elements that are predetermined that we've decided for ourselves, that we've consented and contracted to. So that would include things like whether we're going to be male or female, where in the world we're going to live, what part of the world we're going to grow up in, you know, who our parents are going to be, who our spouse is going to be if we're going to have a spouse, whether we're going to have children. I think these are elements of our lives that are predetermined to a very large extent.
And all you have to do is just look at anywhere we don't have a voice or a say in what's happening and what's going on, like you talk about who our parents are or what our name is going to be. We have zero input. So like you say, there has to be some kind of predeterminism in that, because we absolutely have zero say in that aspect of the journey.
It's all part of the divine plan, and we're operating with all the limitations of a human mind. And I think a human mind, even when you access higher consciousness, can only go so far in terms of being able to embrace and take on board everything that there is to know. It's only when we get out of human form that we can truly, and go back to source and become more godlike, if you like, that we can truly understand what we're doing here. And, you know, the game wouldn't work. The school wouldn't work if we came in knowing everything. So we're kind of stumbling around in the dark, rediscovering stuff the best we can. And like I say, there's this interplay between that which is predetermined and that which is left open to free will. So people have access to information and they have a free will choice as to whether they're going to embrace that or throw it out. It's a very complex interplay between these two elements. I don't claim to fully understand it at all. I'm not in any way saying that I have a full understanding of it. I'm still learning just as much as anyone else. But to me, that seems to be the dynamics that are at work in this level of reality in which we find ourselves.
Right. And again, this is what you're talking about is where Colleen and I have spent the lion's share of our research, because it seemed to us early on that this was the highway, the superhighway towards ultimate truth. And so we've really spent a long time, and once again within both worlds, doing research on this, checking everything for ourselves. But again, like you so brilliantly said, the brain or the mind can only take you so far, and at a certain point, if you don't accept the other aspect or other nature to our reality, you're stuck. You're always stuck with 50 yards or half of the playing field of knowledge if you don't accept or understand the holistic nature of our reality. That's and right. In the case of the mind, you cannot think of the mind without thinking of the heart. And again, everything that you've said in the show thus far, and everything that I've touched on with both Mike in part 1 and Crow 777 in part 2, which will be released in a couple of days, is duality. So when you're talking about this nature reality of our existence, and this relationship between predeterminism and free will, and it seems complex, and how does it work? Everything, very simply put, is a duality.
Right.
Absolutely everything in this physical realm is purposefully constructed as a duality. And what does a duality mean? It means that there is no beginning, and there is no end. And in fact, darkness and light being the ultimate examples of duality, there is no beginning to darkness, there is no end to light, and the line at which something stops being dark and starts being light is almost impossible to see. And that is the nature of our reality, and there's a powerful message that we should be drawing from just opening our eyes to this simple truth. And it is.
This place is a construct, and we're told by scientists and professors and gurus that they've got it all worked out. They understand what this place is. They understand that we're on this spinning ball hurtling through the infinite vacuum of space, and space is infinite. There's galaxies that just go on forever, and we're just one insignificant speck of dust within that. I'm sure we'll get into, the cosmology of this whole thing as the conversation progresses, but we're told that those that are smarter than us have it all figured out, and you don't need to spend too much time worrying about the true nature of this reality. But it's a construct, and it only exists because we perceive it into being. And I just wonder whether this place in which we find ourselves would exist in its current form if there were no conscious sentient beings to experience it. So no humans, no animals. Would there even be this place, this world?
No, there wouldn't. There wouldn't be. And this is again why all of this talk about doomsday and Armageddon. And Armageddon doesn't mean, if you look up the literal definition of the word Armageddon, and I'm not going to tell you, it's so easy for me to just teach and tell. I want you to do your own research yourself and find out the very simple, easy to understand truth of the word Armageddon. And it is not an ending. In fact, it is the opposite of that, but I'll leave it to our listeners to do their own research into this.
Right.
Everything that we've been taught is a lie, and it is designed to keep us spinning around. But here's the key thing: where? Spinning around, constantly distracted, but where? And what we're going to enter into right now, Mark, is the central thesis behind all of this, and that is, if everything is a lie, what is the biggest lie of them all? In other words, what are they ultimately protecting? And of course, we know that those that are truly ruling this ride, because we've allowed them to, are ultimately protecting this ride where they have all of the control, all of the money, all the wealth, all of the true freedom, and we have illusions. So we live in a physical realm, but everything within our physical realm is just an illusion, and they get no end of joy and laughter out of this. And that's why, Mark, you see and talk about all of this truth encoded in Hollywood movies, or in music industry songs, or in Madison Avenue commercials or advertising. Everywhere we turn, they're laughing at us because we have allowed the few to rule over the many. And it comes back to what we started with earlier, which is that we are passive learners. And passivity comes from not understanding the wholeness of ourselves and our reality. So and I'll go back to Mike Williams again, if we only accept that all that exists is a 50-yard football field of this physical world, and that anything else is sort of mumbo jumbo, then that's where we're spinning round and round and round as distracted lab rats, chasing our own tails in half of a football field. So what is important, what is to very simply explain this to our listeners, and so that we can move forward and actually begin to change things in every one of our listeners' lives today. They can walk away from this conversation and begin to take power back into their existence by listening to the major components of what we're talking about today. If everything is a duality, that means by sheer definition that the opposite of this physical realm, this three-dimensional physical realm, would be an infinite dimension non-physical realm.
Right.
And it has to be, because everything else is a duality.
Well, it's part of the construct that we're in. And certain conditions had to be in place in this apparently physical realm in order for us to be able to undergo these experiences and learn these lessons. So duality is expressed in this realm in things like we have the sun and the moon, these opposing values and forces, light and dark, good and evil, night and day. You know, everything has its own polar opposite in this realm, but it only exists within this realm. And then in order for us to undergo these lessons, we have to have things like these physical bodies, which have the capacity to feel pain, for sadness, for joy. We have the capacity for disease. Of course, eventually we grow old and die, and that's a result of time, the passage of linear time, which only exists in this realm, in this dimension, but without it, then we wouldn't age and die, and so the cyclical nature of life would not be in place. And density, you know, apparent physicality. It just strikes me that these are all constructs that had to be created and in place in order for us to undergo these meaningful experiences, but they only exist in this life. And when we move beyond it and we go back to where we came from and where we were before we incarnated into this madhouse, then you know, we go back to our true state. And I think that we judge ourselves. And we're working through karmic debt that we've accumulated through, again, this interplay between things which are predetermined and things that we come to through our free will. But I really do feel that we judge ourselves. When we undergo these life reviews that I mentioned, and we look back on the life that we've just lived and how we affected others and whether we put good into the world or whether we just consumed and contributed nothing, we are judging ourselves. That's another thing that really resonates with me. You don't have this tyrannical God that is ordering us to get in these bodies and go into these lives. I think it's all down to us and our higher selves. And that duality had to be in place here in order for that to work out.
Of course, and that is exactly right, and that is very simply, you just described our reality. Whether anyone wants to accept it or not is just a choice in the moment for them. It doesn't change the fact that what you just described is, through just plain, pure, simple common sense, is our reality. So again, you have this relationship between predeterminism and free will, which in and of itself is yet another example of duality. Everything is a duality. So getting back to the description I was giving of what duality is and what it means that no beginning, no end. It means that everything is infinite. And as such, apply that to free will, it means that no two people can possibly be alike, that no two people, even if they're identical twins, can possibly have the same experiment. No,
even if they're both Paul McCartney.
Even if they're all Paul McCartney, because
right.
I think there's at least four, but they cannot be, no one can be the same. No country should look like another country. No culture should reflect another culture. None of these things are possible under the base understanding of duality, which is infinite possibilities, and free will. And how does that work? Every single moment, another experience presents itself, and in every moment, we make a free will, conscious or unconscious decision in that moment against the backdrop of duality, because everything is a duality. Left, right, up, down, on, off, morning, night, everything is a duality. It is the what you were describing earlier in great detail about how incredible this is, just shows to you elegant design, not some malevolent creation of some alien reptilian culture,
Right.
and we live within some kind of holographic malevolent system, or this is just, a chunk of rock hurling through random space.
Cosmic
and all the rest
accidents,
of it.
completely meaningless, completely random. Just the way it
Exactly.
happened.
Everything is just so incredibly worked out through the principle of duality that it's elegant design. And elegant design talks not just about a creator, but a benevolent creator, right? That's right. What this is. And when you were saying, it's complex, and how do we explain this to the listener? I think I've been able to do this. But to explain it simply, we have to go into the East, into the Far East, and we have to come up what I call the trilogy of existence in 3 Sanskrit words. And again, I really, really, really hope for all of our audience will do their own homework on this, because these are the only rules or laws that Colleen and I live our lives through. And these 3 words, this trilogy of existence, are the words Satyagraha, Ahimsa, and the Samsara. Now, Satyagraha, as I discussed earlier, was Gandhi's purpose in life, and that is life as a simple pursuit of the truth. That's it. That is the way of life. That's our job in life. And as such, in this physical realm, we're all scientists. That's what we are. That's what we do. That's what we did as kids. We're applying the scientific method. And the scientific method says that there are no absolute truths. There are theories that we attempt to rationalize, and we test them and test them and test them, but we don't hold the basis to our reality or existence or sense of self through any kind of thing as an absolute. What we should hold ourselves to is the pursuit of truth, which is the scientific method. That's what science is and what science is about. And yet today, with scientism, it is the absolute opposite. There is no science. There is no scientific method anymore. There's only this theoretical nonsense that I figured it out with some complex equation. Just take my word for it. Instead of, this is what we did. Try it for yourself. So that is Satyagraha. Ahimsa is the principle of no violence in any form, so that my life is the pursuit of truth that has no other purpose to it, and through the experience of the scientific method. And while I'm doing it, the only law that is necessary, you think of our system, Mark, and I know you know this, and you've explained it better than anyone else. This insane system of the rule of man, the rule of law, is bullshit. There's only one law that we need, which is ahimsa.
Do no
Cause
harm.
no violence. Do no harm. Do what you need to do, but do no harm in any form. This is not just physical. It can be with words, anything. We exist through the 5 senses. No violence.
It's the non-aggression principle. It's the simplest thing in the world. I've expressed before that you could be teaching this to a 5-year-old child and they could understand it. You don't like being treated in that way? Don't treat other people that way. Simple. There it is, right there. In terms so straightforward a 5-year-old could understand. And yet we've got a world of grown adults that don't seem to be able to grasp that most basic of concepts.
Exactly. And to just complete this narrative here, because it's so important, and that is the samsara. And the samsara is this cycle, eternal cycle of life, which is birth, life, death, and rebirth. And here's the thing, and this takes enormous amount of hubris on our part as human beings to deny this, because everything that we see in nature, and including ourselves, you can't get away from this reality. It's the truth. observable through the scientific method. Everything is recycled. There is no end. Right now in Mexico, it's mango season. I was talking to Mike. They're just brilliant beyond description. And when the mangoes have finished and the seeds fall to the ground and they fall into the ground, they recreate. And that is, you can say, well, that is the child of that tree. Well, we're all connected. We're all one.
It's a metaphor for our souls, right?
Exactly, for everything in nature. And when our physical bodies die, they just turn back to dust. The dust goes back into the soil, and there's growth again. When you look at wheat or any form of food that is grown, it's the same process. Everything provides a seed, and then the seed is reborn. So everything in our experience, it's like, hello, bang, hit me over the head with Mr. Obvious. Everything is a continuation, and that is the samsara. So through these three principles, three Sanskrit words, we find the simple reason why we're here. Who am I? Why am I here? What is our ultimate purpose and goal? Satyagraha, ahimsa, and samsara. And isn't it interesting, Mark, how all three of these principles represent the exact opposite of the big lie? And the big lie that all these other lies that you were talking about earlier, food and vaccinations and everything else is designed to protect the big lie. And the big lie is this, that all that exists is a big, vast, ever-expanding, cold, impersonal universe that is spiraling out of control and pulling us along for the ride, and that the best any one of us can do is get out of its way, try not to contract cancer, try not to piss off your kids too much, try to retire with some money and some health, go visit Yosemite.
Get the latest iPhone, don't forget, and the latest flat screen TV.
That's right, along the way, and every edition in between. And then you die, and that's it. And now they're taking this concept of God away from us, a creator away from us, so that we turn to dust, and that's it. Dinosaurs, which never existed, had their time. We are the latest, number one force on Earth. We'll have our time.
We could be struck by an asteroid at any time. So fear.
That's right. Never happens, but it could. It could. And so what you see with the big lie is that it takes us away from the opposite. And the opposite of everything that I just described is that you, Mark Devlin, exist. I, Charlie Freak, exist. And that when we turn on, by simply breathing, by simply opening our eyes or listening with our ears through all five of our senses, when we turn on, we create this reality. In other words, the world out there exists for us. Now, what would the world look like today if we taught that simple narrative to our children from the moment that they were born? Exactly. That you are in control of your ride. This is just a ride. You'll have fun this time, and when this experience ends, it goes on and on as long as you want it to, in any form or fashion that you want it to, because you're gifted with free will and you are in charge, not anyone else. Don't be afraid, like Bill Hicks said, ever. Just experience this ride. And when you get tired of it, meditate, go to sleep, do some yoga. And this is taking us into the last aspect of our discussion today, and perhaps obviously the most important, which is the now awakening, opening of the other 50 yards of the football field, our non-physical conscious selves. And here's the thing, folks. Mark has said this to you. He understands it as well. The only way that we achieve a relationship with God, our creator, whatever you want to call that. And I apologize in advance for just using the term God. Some people might might be offended by that term. I'm talking, like Mark said, about a creator. The only way to have a relationship, a face-to-face, as it actually talks about in the Bible and all of these other religious texts, a face-to-face relationship with God is by going within. And isn't it interesting that in the Bible and in all of these other religious texts and ancient societies, they all talk about climbing Jacob's ladder through the 32 steps of the vertebrae to get to the, in essence, the capstone, the 33rd vertebrae, which is Atlas, which is what our heads actually rest upon. And then when we go through the 33rd vertebrae, we enter into the thalamus, which is the absolute most central part of our brain. And in the thalamus, we exit out the right door and we enter into the world of the pineal. And the pineal gland is an actual eye. It is what's called our third eye. And it is there, as it says in the Bible. And again, just it's ubiquitous through all of these ancient cultures. You will meet our Creator face to face. But if you don't know this, you haven't heard this before, or if your response to what I just said to you is to just kind of smirk or laugh or just, throw it out, then you're stuck. I'm sorry to be the one telling you this. I'm only doing it out of love. Trust me. This is the only way in which we evolve. There is such a thing as evolution. It's evolution of the mind. And the evolution of the mind can only come by going within. When we stay out in the physical world, the mind is polluted with facts, figures, and logic. All of this bullshit, all these small lies to hide the big lie that we exist, that we are real, and that God lies within. That's the truth of our reality. But if you're not prepared to entertain this, to do your own research, or to try once a day or even once a week for 20 minutes or half an hour to just clear your mind of all of society's white noise until you reach silence, then you will never experience this. And everything that I'm saying might as well be a lie because you won't experience it. This is the holistic nature. This is what Mark was talking about, and by the sounds of it, it's what he's going to be writing about in many ways as well. The holistic aspect of our reality, that we exist in every single moment in two worlds, physical and non-physical. And when we accept this, we rise up out of our body from the sixth chakra, the chakra of the third eye chakra, to the crown chakra, which just happens to be just above, outside of the skull, which is a metaphor. It is a unification of two worlds. And this is what I was calling, Mark, earlier, what eye level is. Not EYE, which is important, but the letter I level. Eye level is that moment where you realize and accept that we are experiencing two worlds in one moment, and that anything is possible. And that is lore, legend, and magic, and not facts, figures, and logic. And I'm going to let you jump back in.
Doesn't it speak volumes that natural law that we touched upon, particularly the non-aggression principle of do not cause harm to others, do not treat others in a way you would not wish to be treated yourself, is not taught to children in schools? I mean, who could really object to it? It's a great lesson in morality. I can't imagine any parent phoning up a head teacher in disgust and saying, "What are you doing teaching my child not to treat other people in this way?" Who could really have any kind of objection to that? And yet it's not taught in schools. And imagine the impact if it was. And what you were saying there about how the control system has got everything locked down so that if they don't mind control you with one of the organised orthodox religions, if you don't adhere to Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism or Islam or any of these others, then they've got scientism, atheistic scientism to hit you over the head with. And I actually drank that Kool-Aid myself. I went down that route myself for many years. Very early on, in my early 20s, I believed that I'd become a born-again Christian. So I got coerced into attending this evangelical Christian church for 4 years. And I became so disillusioned and so unimpressed with what I'd seen from certain members of that church and the way the whole thing operated, that it sent me down the route of being a quite bitter atheist. And I lapped up the work of people like Richard Dawkins.
Exactly.
Professor Richard Dawkins. And he basically states that life is just this random thing that just happened. And we're just living on this cold, heartless lump of rock hurtling through space. There's absolutely nothing special about us. We evolved from monkeys, and before that came from, pond life, just bacteria. And when we die, that's it. We cease to exist in any form whatsoever. So if they don't get you with one of the religions, they get you with this very nihilistic, atheistic viewpoint. So you've got to hand it to them, really, in terms of how they've been able to mind control so many people. And it's only when you come to this alternative understanding of our true nature, which we're discussing now, which is that we're all expressions of the divine, of creation, that you're starting to really understand why you came here. There's a movie called Cloud Atlas, which I love, and I mention it in my book. It came from the Wachowskis, who of course are system players. They're very much adhering to certain agendas through the Hollywood movies that they make. They did The Matrix, they did V for Vendetta, but this is an incredible movie, and I certainly recommend that people watch it. It's based on a book by David Mitchell, and it tells the story of several characters who are reincarnated through 6 different timelines. And the story just jumps between these different timelines, and you see the same characters undergoing different lives. And the choices that they make in one life impact what they come back as, or who they come back as, and what their next life is going to be. And the tagline for the promotion of the movie was an exploration of how the actions of individual lives impact one another in the past, present and future, as one soul is shaped from a killer into a hero, and an act of sadness ripples across centuries to inspire a revolution. And the tagline seems to have been inspired by a quote that was put out there by a Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius, who said, "What we do in life ripples through eternity." So how amazing to see all that presented in a Hollywood movie. You don't get that level of truth that often, although they do often encode great truths into works of apparent fiction, which people just write off as, oh, it's just a movie, it's just a TV show. And another TV show that I really loved is one that is probably going to be unfamiliar to American audience members or anyone outside of the UK. But there was this great show a few years ago. I mean, I don't watch TV, but I did make an exception for this. It was called Ashes to Ashes. And it was the sequel to a show called Life on Mars. It was very heavy on allusions to the music of David Bowie. So the first one was set in the 1970s. Ashes to Ashes was set in the very early 1980s. And you basically got this bunch of cops. So on the surface, it seems to be like a cop thriller in the style of The Sweeney or something like that. And this is one of the things, I guess, which has inspired this novel that I want to put out, which on the surface is a thriller, a murder mystery. But when you go delving beneath the glossy veneer, you find that there's a great many metaphors and allegories and spiritual truths being communicated. And so it was with Ashes to Ashes. So you've got a bunch of cops in an early 80s setting, and they're having all these adventures, and there's personality clashes and relationship problems and things like that. But in the very last episode of the show, you come to discover that they're actually all dead, and they're living in this kind of middle world purgatory type of existence. And one of the characters says to the other, what are we doing here? What is this place? And the main character says, this is a place we come to in order to sort ourselves out. So all these cops had died in the course of duty on the job, and they'd all died before their time in very sudden and unexpected ways. And the idea is that their souls are still coming to terms with the fact that they were taken so quickly, and because they've got these issues to work out, they've created themselves or manifested themselves in this alternate reality to sort themselves out and get their shit together, you know. And I think that is another really good metaphor for what we're doing here. We're sorting our shit out. We're coming to terms with our issues. We're learning these lessons. We're working off the debt of karma that we've accumulated through previous lives. We're atoning for, you know, mistakes and bad decisions that we've made in the past. And we're all at different points in the journey, like I said before. And some of us are putting great work into the world and making whatever positive contribution we can because we've recognised that this is our duty, this is our responsibility, this is what we need to be doing. Just some further thoughts that I wanted to throw in there, really.
Thanks so much for sharing those. And, you know, again, it really just sets and takes everything back to the heart of it, which is that, listen, if everything is a duality and all our reality is expressing free will against the duality, you know, really there ultimately is no right or wrong. There is no good or bad. There are certainly acts of darkness and there are acts of light. But in the end, it's really about the individualistic expression of one's own journey. And if we do that journey through the principle of ahimsa, which is that we cause no violence to anyone else, I'm not sure how we're going to rack up any negative or anti-karmic points against ourselves, because clearly, if you just, like I said, just take a step back and then just apply common sense to the situation. If we have free will, if everything is an infinite line of duality, then our only job in life, certainly in this physical realm, is to apply the scientific method and just make decisions, have experiences in the moment. And as long as we're not causing violence to anyone else, then again, I just don't see where we're accumulating any of these negative or anti-karmic points. And it leads us into this final section of the discussion today, which is really the importance of taking all of this knowledge that people like yourself have unveiled and stripping away the emperor's clothes and seeing the truth behind this impressive but illusory house of card construction that they've created for us. And really what we see is that we have to be very, very careful that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So here's a great example of duality. I came to know you through your work, which is Musical Truth, and your unveiling of the true nature, reality of the music industry, and how it's connected to all other aspects of the matrix. It's run by the same people for the same purposes.
Right.
Yet I came to you as an author of the book series, The 150 Most Important Rock Albums in Music History. And on that list, the 72 artists, bands that created these 150 albums, is a list of many people that you have labeled as being purposeful or you know, just coincidental players within the music industry, right, and complicit with at least some aspects of this very, very sick system.
Right.
So from that extent, you and I are on the surface polar opposites, because you're on the surface tearing apart the music industry and calling out all of these people, names as big as Jim Morrison, John Lennon, even George Harrison.
Well,
David
I remember
Bowie, for sure.
When you first reached out to me, you said that you'd written this book series and, you know, this was incredibly inspiring, uplifting music. And I took a look at it and I saw all these names and I was like, well, does this guy realize what these artists were into and where they came from? And we had a back and and forth discussion by email, and it turned out that absolutely you did understand, you'd done the research. I came to realise that you are a switched-on guy. You're not just someone that's been blinded by these idols, these gurus, and is all starstruck. And we found a lot of common ground, but we were coming at it from different perspectives, which I think you were leading on to.
Exactly, and as such, we've become, from afar, we become, I would say, even just soulmates in many ways, because we just seem to be very, very connected to the heart of each other's thoughts.
Maybe there's some stuff that each of us had missed. Maybe my work has uncovered some of the affiliations and some of the unsettling connections of some of these artists that maybe you didn't know about, and maybe you delving deeply into their work and dissecting some of their music and lyrics has uncovered aspects of them that I'd not considered, and it presents the tantalizing possibility that many of them were trying to put out meaningful messages to wake up and uplift people, possibly away from whatever corporate agendas had been set out for them. And maybe that's something that I'd missed in certain instances. There's probably not a hard and fast rule, which is that in every single case, each and every musician is putting out messages off their own back to try and warn us about what's going on in the world. I don't think you can make a blanket statement like that. You have to take each artist on an individual basis. But I think each of us has learnt something from the other in terms of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as you said.
And it's so true. And again, the very nature of the music industry is that it has to be that way, because it's an industry. The first thing that we all need to just, again, let's turn on our deductive hats of reasoning, Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle, and let's just apply some basic common sense here and deductive reasoning. It's an industry. The music industry is an industry. It means that the governing principles to it are economic in nature, which in and of itself, we all know now, is a sham. It's a house of cards. It's monopoly money. But they're running it through, because they own it, this concept of private property and ownership, which is ludicrous. But because the perception of ownership, and we go along with it, it means that they've got the last say. And the say of the film industry and the music industry and even the book industry is clearly governed by agendas. And these agendas are anti-God. They're anti-individual. They're anti-satyagraha, ahimsa, samsara, and they are upside down. So anyone who's in that industry is faced with this incredible roadblock. And so the very first thing, if it were you or I, Mark, the very first thing that we would do when we started to warm up to our reality and what's going on and how we're very much monitored and controlled and even being pushed down certain pathways, the first thing we would do is go, shit, how do I get any truth out? And how far do I dare go? And so this is why when you look at the greatest songwriters in history and the greatest music, and I focused in this book series on rock and roll, so we're looking at, Dylan and Lennon and Harrison and, of course, Steely Dan and everyone else along the line, Bruce Springsteen. When we're going through this, what you're finding is that they had to write in allegories. They had to write with applicability to save their own skins, to be able to get things published. Again, here's the thing. Outside of us nutters, Mark and I and a few others in this, alternative media, saying these things in a very direct and blunt fashion to you. If that's not enough for you, if you're waiting for Sting, if you're waiting for anyone else within the mainstream world to come out and say to you, you know what, listen, I read Mark's book, he's got it down pat. This is exactly how the industry works. And in fact, where he leads you spiritually is bang on as well. And they know this. They're keeping God from you. And this is our reality. That's never going to happen. It's an industry that they control, which means that nothing will get published that they don't want published. So unless you encode things deeply in your work, painting, written word, in movies or in music, it isn't going to get published. And so this is why I could have named the book Don't Miss the Message, because that's exactly what all of these authors and these creators are saying. Please, please, please enjoy the melody and, get hooked on the melody, but don't miss the message, because there's a powerful message. And what I did, Mark, in the book series is that, and it just is my way as a kid growing up, I didn't want to know anything about these artists in their personal lives. And so even though I'm perhaps one of the most knowledgeable people in perhaps, the world today on this music, I don't know much of anything about what's going on in their personal lives. And it's important because it doesn't cloud my judgment. So the only things that I ever said and am saying in the book series is what these authors have said themselves. I focus only upon the albums, the songs, and the lyrics and how it ties to the music on these albums. And that's all I'm doing. And through these messages, through this deeply encoded allegorical or applicable messages that are placed there, are the absolute highest truth. And so now we come right back to what you unveiled, which is the industry and how so complicit some of these people are, some of the very people that I talked about myself. And so what we get is this dualistic reality. So David Bowie is an absolute evil, horrible, rotten person. There are aspects of David Bowie that clearly show that he did anything to achieve fame, and he played very important, powerful roles for the system, and that's why they celebrate David Bowie. And it's those characters that he created, that, transgender and space oddity, and all of these things that help with their lives. But the flip side of that is that Bowie also spoke some of the most deepest, darkest, down the rabbit hole truths, and some of the most important spiritual truths as well. So what are we supposed to do with this? What are we supposed to do with John Lennon and George Harrison, who were part of the number one construct, which for the system, which was the Beatles?
Right.
And yet both of them represent some of the most important truth, honest, humane lyrics and songs and expressions in our history. What are we supposed to do with this? And what comes to mind, for example, is the title of your last podcast, which your speech at Ben's conference. What was the
No More
title?
Heroes. They call it Dreaming Saucers, but yeah, No More Heroes. I was basically saying we don't really know these individuals. We just get the public relations version of them, the glossy surface version of them, and we don't really know what happens in their private lives and who they're affiliated with and what agendas they may be operating to. So my advice is have no more heroes. Certainly, I'm not advocating that you stop listening to the music. I've made that very clear, and I've caught some flack for it, because some people say to me, well, you spend all this time exposing the true nature of the industry and the affiliations of these artists and how many of them are the creations of military intelligence, and then you go right ahead and say, but don't stop listening to their albums. And it comes down to free will choice again. If you decide that you don't want to listen to any more Doors or Rolling Stones or U2 albums, you have the choice of going right ahead and chucking them all out and not listening to that stuff again. But it's not something you have to do. I think you can still bear in mind an understanding of where many of these artists came from, and there's so much evidence to bear out these facts. But the fact is they still made great music in so many cases, and so many of their songs can be listened to on the basis of them being uplifting and inspiring, even though the artist may not be quite who you thought they were. So if you want to live in a world without music, go right ahead. That's your choice. But my choice is not to. My choice is to continue to listening to great music, but bearing in mind who some of these artists most likely were. They're not quite who you thought they were. But it doesn't take anything away from the amazing impact of so much of their music, so many songs.
Right. So, and doesn't this just get back to the heart of what we said earlier, that within the physical realm isn't what we're supposed to be doing the scientific method? Everything is an experience. And so we don't fall hook, line, and sinker for anything. We apply the scientific method to every single aspect. And this is the importance of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because again, one of the most now within the truth community, and I really disdain this, the sort of the poster children for those who sold out humanity and gave us that Laurel Canyon fake hippie movement is none other than Jim Morrison. And yet, folks, again, I have done the research, the deep research within not just the lyrics, but the music and how they tie in with one another on all of these artists. And Jim Morrison, I can assure you, if you take the time to apply your scientific method to this, will come to the same conclusions. That Morrison was talking about some of the deepest, darkest down the rabbit hole truths. He, in the very first Doors album, the very last song on the album, The End, it's been spun 100 different ways through the mainstream media because they want to cause confusion. The reality is he's talking about his mom and dad, and he's talking about what they did to him, thrusting him onto this national stage by first putting him through a mental torture and fracturing his mind. And so in the song, he's talking about killing his father and having intercourse with his mother, and you're talking about a person that is in absolute pain over the fact that as just a child, a kid, that he was taken as a useful asset for some larger institution or the greater good, and then used. And Jim Morrison was powerfully saying, I am not something to be used. And the fact that it's my parents who are culpable in this and allowing me to be offered up as a sacrificial lamb or goat for the industry or the system is unforgivable. And that there's lots of work that I need to do with this as well. But it starts by admitting that reality in that situation. And so before we all just rush out to just slay this larger than life image of Jim Morrison, which we should, because he was never that construct. We should not destroy the human being Jim Morrison, who was living, breathing, loving, caring, and shared an enormous amount of truth with us.
Well, where do we put him? You know, what kind of box do you insert Jim Morrison in? This is the dilemma. This is the quandary that we all face looking on, because there's certain aspects of him which are undeniable. The research has been done. You know, his dad was this naval commander. He was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident. He basically got America involved in the Vietnam War, and all those lives were lost, and all that misery and suffering and pain and death ensued. So what do we assume Jim made of all of this if he wasn't a willing participant in it? Certainly in interviews he said his parents were dead, and a lot of people interpret that as they're dead to me, I disown them, I want nothing to do with my dad. And you've just mentioned his attitude towards him in the song The End. But what do we think was weighing on Jim's mind, on his conscience, when he saw all this carnage and all this death occurring overseas, knowing that his own father had a part in it, and he's staying silent about it? Because if he came out and said, yeah, this is who my dad was and I completely disavow all his actions, he knew that there would have been consequences for him. But I just wonder how he dealt with all of that if he wasn't a willing participant in it.
And what the answer to what you were just saying, we saw it. That's what we saw in Jim Morrison's brief life as the larger than life rock star. We saw him fall apart, fall into pieces as his programming wore off, and he became more and more consciously aware of himself and his family and the Vietnam War and
well, it's one possibility. And then we've also got the fact that he was a huge consumer of LSD and other drugs and alcohol, and he was popularizing the use of that among the Doors fan base, easily malleable kids that were into the music and that had revered him as a god, you know, as these rock icons are. So again, was that something that he entered into willingly and knowingly, or were we just witnessing the guy's life falling apart and he's going to pieces right there in the public eye? It's all an enigma. I'm not claiming to have the answers to this, but there are different possibilities. And of course, if Jim Morrison was an isolated incident in terms of his dad being a big-time career military guy, then we could write it off as just one of those things. But as you well know,
but it's not.
Yeah, it crops up time and time again. Dads being high-ranking military officers and having connections to the CIA and Skull and Bones and Harvard and Yale time and time and time again. So, you know, what do we make of it in so many cases?
Exactly. And so what we make of it is that we have to apply the scientific method to all of our experiences here. And so what we get is ultimately a higher awareness or a higher consciousness where we come to see, and of course you can't do this unless you understand the holistic nature of our reality. We begin to see that no one is perfect, that no one is the ultimate answer. And if no one is perfect and no one is the ultimate answer, that means that the only one who can be for you is you. And that what we take from Jim Morrison and what we take from Joni Mitchell, what we take from David Crosby, who all have these same connections.
That's right.
What we take from them is the beautiful, honest truth and love that and just genius that was encoded in their works. And it's the same for Jim Morrison. And again, a lot of people go on and on and on about Morrison pushing this lifestyle. Really, drugs, sex, rock and roll. He got heavily into, once they were watching him for the use of narcotics, then he got heavily into alcohol. He's just trying to placate the mind, the imagination that is working against him.
That's before we get into the very highly likely faked death in 1971, which I don't buy the official story of that at all.
For sure. And of course, that could have been presented to him in advance, and he's having a hard time. So he's just distracting himself. These are all just distractions that he's doing. But really, if you truly understand the Doors and their music, what you'll know that what Jim Morrison actually wrote about was not the celebration of taking of the wanton, reckless taking of narcotics. What he was writing about is that you are what's real, and that you must go within, and that we must create our reality by going within, and we must be the leaders.
Well, you've got to be your own hero. That's the way I wrapped up that talk that time, by saying the only person you really know and that you can really rely on and that you know is never going to let you down is yourself, because you can't have that assurance with anyone else, because people always let you down because you don't really know them the way you think you do, but you know yourself, and you've got to be your own hero and stop externalizing to all these other characters that are presented up to us.
And isn't it interesting and ironic that it was the likes of Jim Morrison, John Lennon, and George Harrison that were saying exactly what you were saying in your music. It is on virtually all of their in the case of Lennon and Harrison, their solo albums, and it was encoded in most of Jim Morrison's songs, which is that you must become the leader of your own reality. You must be in control of your mind. And that they were all saying the same thing too, which is that there are two worlds. And you know what we find in this in our podcast today, that all of this takes us full circle to how you started and where you're headed. And I'm always amazed at the beauty of synchronicity and how it's always playing itself out, whether it is in darkness or in light, it's always playing itself out. And it makes perfect sense why you and I met each other, and why we have the relationship that we do with each other. And
That's right.
and I'll just say it again to all of our listeners. If you don't yet have a copy of Musical Truth Volume 1 or 2, these are books that I call essential reading to life. So if you want to look at this, that it is just an excellent examination of the music industry, which it is, that's fine. It's entertaining and enlightening, and you'll get your money's worth and then some there. But what Mark writes about and talks about are the holistic principles of our reality. And what he exposes in the Down the Rabbit Hole truths are ubiquitous in the movie industry, within the publishing industry, within the controlled art world, within the mainstream media. Everything that Mark is going to teach you through these books, you can apply to decode what's going on in all other aspects of your life. Now, where else are you going to get that in a single book or book series of 2? So they really are essential reading from my perspective.
Well, thank you. And it probably surprises people when they get to the final sections of those 2 books, because you've learned all about the machinations and the fuckeries of the music industry, and then suddenly we start going into consent and free will and contracting and natural law and consequentialism. And I'm sure that shakes a few people up a bit, and they think, what the hell is this doing in this book? But you've got to come with the solutions to all these problems. You can't just beat people over the head all day with information on how we're all fucked and we're all going to hell in a handcart. You know, the responsible thing to do is to then present to people what we need to do to get out of this. And really it just comes down to taking personal responsibility, and again applying your free will consciousness, our greatest gift, and just not cooperating with this madness control system in as far as it's in your power to extricate yourself from it and pull back from it. There's many different ways in which you can. I mean, my whole thing with exposing the true nature of the music industry, as I just touched on, is letting people know that these artists are not your friends. They're not there to enrich your life. You can certainly get something from some of their songs. You can enjoy some of their music. But their ultimate reason for being put into the public consciousness is not to make your life better and give you a nice time. It's to mind control you and sow certain values and belief systems in your minds in line with larger agendas that are going on elsewhere in society. So when you come to that kind of understanding, as I said, you can still continue to enjoy the music, but it certainly pays to be informed as to what these people really are and why they're given these public roles. And it's not just musicians, it's Hollywood actors, it's television presenters, it's sports stars, it's supermodels, it's politicians, it's business leaders like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Richard Branson, anyone in the public eye, anyone you've heard of, anyone with any kind of public profile, as I've expressed in my various talks on lifetime actors and culture creation. So then you have the political system, and we're all tied to that by way of largely the taxes that so many of us are coerced into paying, and our adherence to these jobs that we need to do in order to keep the bills paid and feed the family and keep a roof over our heads. But there's ways that you can extricate yourself from that as well and not be as involved as you might otherwise be. What about non-compliance days? You know, this is a great idea when we're talking about solutions. It's something that's been suggested by various people along the way, and there's been different attempts to do it. But one 24-hour period of mass withdrawal from the system where you just don't spend. You don't go into shops. You don't consume anything. You don't engage with the banking system, the financial system, the corporate system in any way. Can you imagine?
Mainstream media?
Yeah, turn off your TV. I mean, people should turn off their TV anyway or throw it out, but just turn it off for a day and don't swallow any of the mind control that's being regurgitated and projectile vomited out of your TV screen. Imagine the effect of millions of people around the world all doing that on the same day. Can you imagine the impact that it would have on the system, on shops, on banks, on businesses, just to send a little warning out to the control system as to what it is we're capable of when we all come together and realise that the power is with us, and that the system is being propped up by us silly buggers, continuing to go along with it.
Exactly.
Non-compliance days are a great way of exercising our power. But there's many other ways that people can come up with. There's cooperative, voluntary systems where people trade goods and services with each other. Leave the banks, leave the big businesses out of it. Just people coming together on a community basis and helping each other out in a positive spirit of cooperativeness. So many different ways that if large numbers of people were aligning themselves with an understanding of natural law, do no harm, what we all are, where we've come from, what the meaning of this experience that we're undergoing is. We have this concept of all possibility, which is waiting to play out in this reality. So literally anything is possible. What we have at the moment is a deeply corrupt control system. We've got paedophilia within the ranks, within politics and all other aspects of society. We've got selfishness, corporate greed. We've got this situation where billions of animals are being tortured and brutally murdered every single day in slaughterhouses around the world in horrific conditions. We've got crime, street crime. We've got, rape, murder, all the rest of it. But it doesn't have to be that way. It's only that way because of all possibility, and because collectively as a society we don't care enough, and we've not exercised that capacity for responsibility, and we've not exercised our innate spirituality as much as we could. And so the results speak for themselves. That's why they've come into physical manifestation. That's why we have the kind of society and the kind of world that we're in, which is very ugly and very dark. But it doesn't have to be that way. It never did have to be that way. It's always a choice. Again, as Bill Hicks said in one of his great routines, a choice between fear and love. And the point at which enough of us realise that and start applying our consciousness and making better free will decisions and considering others instead of just ourselves the whole time, then just watch how quickly the resulting dynamics would play out and what a different world we could be living in. So all of this is possible at any time, assuming enough of us want it and apply our consciousness and our free will to it.
It's just so beautifully spoken, and it's so true, Mark. And listen, for the folks listening out there, just think about this. We are creatures of habit. It's one of the aspects of being a human being within these three-dimensional forms that we exist in the physical plane in. So we are creatures of habit. So if you have a non-compliance day, the greatest thing about non-compliance days? They lead to 2 non-compliance days. And when both of those go really well, they lead to 4. And eventually that leads to 16. And exponentially, this concept of non-compliance becomes very easy because it started very easily. It was just one day. I'm not watching TV. Right. I'm not going to a store. And and the other thing that I would suggest with these non-compliance days is get out of your house, go to public locations and interact with your brethren, with other
not on
human
Facebook,
beings.
Actually do it face to face.
Exactly. That's right. Go down to Speaker's Corner, and if you can get past all of the shills that are there, just start interacting with people. And in the simple conversations that human beings have with one another, massive, powerful truths come out. So again, the answers are always so simple. Gandhi simply non-complied with a corrupt, criminal British Empire. It was as simple as, if you're going to apply a tax on something as basic as salt, we'll make it ourselves. And in the meantime, we won't be showing up to these jobs you've created for us. So your system begins to collapse through non-compliance.
And of course, it's scary. It's going to be scary the first time you do it because it's unknown territory. But it's the same thing as, anyone that can swim, there was a point where they took that first stroke and let go of the side of the swimming pool, and they had to learn to do that. But once they'd done those first few strokes and mastered that skill, then it's easy from that point on. Same thing with riding a bike, same thing with learning to drive, same thing with what I had to do when I started presenting this material and got up on stage for the first time to do a public talk. I was absolutely bricking it. But you do one and you think, hey, that wasn't so bad. We could do some more now. You get used to it, you adapt to it, and so it would be with non-compliance.
The best. You're literally the best at it of any of us that are out there. You're the best at it.
Kind of you to say so, but I certainly didn't feel that way the first time round. But you do it once and you realise that, hey, this is actually okay. Let's do it again.
And this is why I brought up that trilogy of Sanskrit words and why it's so important to, like you said, what can we do right now? Okay, start educating your own children. Get involved aggressively in their lives. Stop being so pacifistic about everything. Passive learners is why we believe that the earth is round and that there's gravity, and there's no proof of any of this. We accept it because we're passive learners. We sit down, a teacher stands up in front of us and lectures like that's any form of learning, and of course it's not. And we accept it because from birth we're taught that everybody else has got it all figured out and we just need to learn it along the way. And those who regurgitate it quickly and accurately get lots of nice little treats and eventually become assistants for various cabinet ministers and lords.
Right.
Because we are blind to actual learning and applying our brain to anything. We're just essentially vegetables. But the trilogy of existence is Satyagraha, Ahimsa, and the Samsara. So like you said, the first time you do this, it's a little scary. The first time you non-comply with the system, it could be a little scary. What if riot police show up? What if there's payback from the system, and there's a little bit of a what if? But if we're taught from birth, you
won't know until you try it, right?
Exactly. And if we're taught from birth the samsara, that all you have to do is open your eyes and look to everything in nature, that there is birth, life, death, and rebirth. So you never end. You never end. Don't worry. There is no death. There's just this eternal experience that we control. Then if you know that, if you're taught that from birth, again, you will show up to these rallies. You will take on a little bit of what we would call risk in your experience, because there is no ultimate price to pay. Oh, what if I'm one of those kids at Kent State and I get shot by the National Guard and geez, my ride's over. It's never over. But the big lie is that we die and that's it, and it's this big ever-expanding universe, and it's random, and there's no love, and there's just no care, no compassion. It's just brutal, and do your best. That's the big lie against the truth that it's just a ride, as Bill Hicks said. It's just
Here's
a
Tom
ride.
with the weather.
Here's Tom with the weather. That's right. And one of the greatest things that Bill ever did was that the ending to It's Just a Ride, which was shut him up.
Yeah, and we kill those people.
So I was talking about Mahatma Gandhi, and I was just segueing into what Martin Luther King did in the South, just with the bus strike that he created in the Deep South, and it just started by black folks not buying their lunches at downtown restaurants. And within a couple of weeks, this unlikely marriage occurred between the movement for racial equality in the Deep South and white business owners in the Deep South going, hey, wait a minute, you better allow them on buses, because if you don't, our businesses are going under in a very short period of time. Right. And so you form these unlikely alliances by standing up for yourselves.
That's right. And you don't know until you try. And, it's never been done. It's like anarchists who espouse having no masters, no slaves, no government ministers telling you what to do, no order followers trying to tell you how to live your life. A lot of people are very fearful of that kind of situation because they say, oh, what if it leads to chaos? What if it leads to lawlessness? Well, is it worth a try? Maybe, because it's not been tried in living memory and we don't actually know how it's going to pan out. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Is it not worth a try? You're fearful of chaos and disorder as opposed to what? The perfect, peaceful, fair, just society we have now?
Of course. And of course, it's only getting worse. So all of these, restriction of rights and whatnot for terrorism, there's only more terrorism. And
you don't have a whole lot to lose by giving it a go. And when you come from a place of higher-minded consciousness, if you had large numbers of people accessing that higher aspect of themselves, the answers come to you. So, if you're trying to figure it out sat at a table with a piece of paper and a pen and some spreadsheets, how are we going to make this happen? You're not going to find the answers that way because you're trying to apply a very practical, real-world consciousness to it. But when you access higher consciousness, you know what to do. You go by instinct. You pull those answers out of creation and you become inspired. And large numbers of people all wanting the same result and all accessing that higher consciousness are going to come to some very profound understandings of what needs to be done that you just can't figure out on paper.
Exactly. And again, can we apply some names? Can we apply some names to this? Mahatma Gandhi, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, John Lennon, George Harrison. You look at all these people all got to the point of saying that if we don't make personal choices to change this ride, it's never going to change. And so that's the power. Take back your power, take back the control of your life through the decisions you make in any moment. And then this is where Bill Hicks comes in. Shut him up. Shut him up. I've got a lot of money invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry. Look at my big bank account and my family. Shut him up. And all those names that I just gave you, what do they all have in common? They're not with us anymore.
Exactly. They all went before their time. So, John Lennon, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Bill Cooper, Bill Hicks, dead. Prince Philip, George H.W. Bush, the Queen, Henry Kissinger, George Soros, Jacob Rothschild, alive. Just a coincidence, folks. Nothing to worry about.
It goes on and on and on. And again, if people don't believe that everything is a conspiracy, and it is, if you don't believe that everything is a conspiracy, just think of what happened upon the assassination of Kennedy on November 22nd of 63. You got Lyndon Johnson, which led to the bullshit staged event and of the Vietnam War. And from Lyndon Johnson and the murder of Bobby Kennedy, just brutal, even more obvious than John Kennedy, then you get Richard Nixon. And under Nixon, what do you get? The end of the gold standard, so that money officially becomes monopoly money, paper money. You get, natural plants like cannabis being turned into grade 1 narcotics that you go to prison for the rest of your life with. All of and the space, the moon landings, all of these wonderful times of playing golf and bouncing up and down at half speed on the moon, all just seemed to happen during when Richard Nixon was president. No coincidence there, folks. And then Nixon gets taken out. The non-elected Jerry Ford, who was conveniently just put in there as vice president to replace Spiro Agnew just prior to Nixon being run out of town. Jerry Ford, who, of course, was on the Warren Commission and was J. Edgar Hoover's shill on the undercover agent on the Warren Commission for him, becomes the president, non-elected president. And who does Jerry Ford just happen to choose as the vice president, this unelected new president? Nelson Rockefeller. And no sooner does Jerry Ford become the non-elected president of the United States, appointing Nelson Rockefeller, than two of Charlie Manson's CIA-crazed lunatic family members start taking pot shots at Jerry Ford. And if he gets assassinated, who's president? The unelected Nelson Rockefeller. Let's just end by saying a thank you to all of our listeners for experiencing this journey with us, and a great thank you to you, Mark, for what you've shared with us today. It's just brilliant as always, and I know I can speak for everyone else out there, just great excitement over the novel, and thank you for who you are and all that you do.
Well, thanks for having me on, brother, and for your own contributions as well. I'm really glad our paths crossed. It's just incredible to me that we're able to put out this kind of information in these times. That is a hugely inspiring and positive thing. 10 years ago, I would never have believed I would be doing this with my life. I didn't know any of the stuff that I've spoken about today as recently as 8 years ago. And it's just testament to the incredible times in which we live. We're facing enormous challenges, of course. There's plans underway to do great harm to the human species at the hands of this insane, psychopathic, ruling elite class that we have. But at the same time, there's the opportunity for people to wake up to their true nature, come to understandings about the life path that they're on and the contribution that they can be making towards what happens to humanity from this point on. And that's an incredible thing, and it's an opportunity that's not existed before these times in which we find ourselves now. So those of us who are alive as able-minded and able-bodied adults right now in 2018 and in the years to come actually have tremendous privilege, because we have opportunities open to us that very few humans have had during the course of, our evolution. So these are amazing times. I often get discouraged and despondent about them. It's only natural when you deal with this kind of information that you have off days when you can feel very depressed and demotivated. But for the most part, I find the times in which we live to be full of promise and possibility and potential. And I know many other people feel that way, and many other people are making their contribution to the way things are going to pan out. And what a ride to be on. What an incredible journey this is. I think our souls needed this. Why else would we be here at these times?
So beautifully spoken. And again, thank you so much, Mark, for saying that, because awakening your consciousness and becoming aware, if there's no hope, it just leads to more and more despair. So these messages of truth and this positivity that change is so easily possible, and the true nature of our reality, empowering the individual, is what this is all about. And again, I see you at the forefront of this, Mark, and I am so thankful for all that you have shared with us and created thus far. And I am so truly, genuinely excited for everything else that's coming. And again, thank you so much. And all of Colleen and my love to you and your family. And thank you again, Mark.
Well, thanks a lot, man. Look forward to catching the other installments in your series as well and hearing what the other guests have to say. It's all good.
Thank you, my friend. Have a wonderful evening, and we will talk to you soon.